Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Nyla Christian, and I'm with the Center for African American Recovery Development, and we are here with For the Culture 2.0 back in the streets, trying to understand the get down in communities across the country. What is happening to address the 44% rise in opioid overdose and death and things that are related to behavioral health and substance use disorder in our Black communities across the country. I said I'm with CARD, Center for African American Recovery Development. We are a national organization, and we erected this organization with the help of our advocates and advisory board from across the country of Black recovery advocates who've been in this business for 20, 30 years plus. We have 150 years plus of lived experience and lived expertise on our board. I became the executive director, but I am one of the founding board, and we're here today to talk to some of the new emerging CARD RCO, which stands for Recovery Community Organization, our emerging affiliates across the country. Well, we also have a real treat because we have one of our advisory board members who is a veteran in this business, Dr. Andre Johnson, and this is the business of keeping Black folks well, of meeting our folks where we are, dealing with the historical trauma of the war on drugs, which was war on people, dealing with the intergenerational trauma and the havoc that was left by the 80s and 90s and the war on our families, and meeting folks where they are and trying to get them to where they want to go in terms of their behavioral health and substance use disorder recovery. And most of all, we want to talk about wellness. So I'm going to start by introducing who we have with us today. Like I said, Dr. Andre Johnson. He is the author of The Recovery Ecosystem, and he is the founder. Wow, he is the founder of Detroit Recovery Project, which just celebrated, I believe, they're in their 20th year, as a matter of fact. We have with us also Pastor Linva Messalino out of Panama City, Florida. And in Panama City, Florida, he heads up Newness of Life Incorporated, which is a faith-based recovery community organization. And one of our newest CARD recovery affiliates, RCO affiliates, we have Sarah Johnson, who is our recovery champion out of Orangeburg, South Carolina, serving a tri-country area with the Orangeburg Rural Recovery Initiative. I'm very, very honored to be here with you all today, and we're going to take some questions from you. We want to hear live what's going on in the world, in our communities, in our families. In the meantime, we're going to show a little clip about what's going on in Detroit Recovery, in Detroit, at Detroit Recovery Project. And we're going to talk a bit with Dr. Andre Johnson about how he uh, address the systemic trauma in our communities and erected Detroit Recovery Project over 20 years ago. But first, we're going to start out with a clip from DRP.
I was at a party over Memorial Day weekend a couple years ago, and it was late, somewhere around midnight or 1 in the morning, and somebody on the dance floor fell out. They had overdosed accidentally. And the venue didn't have Narcan. Nobody had Narcan, but I had a friend who was there, who was working the party, and she had Narcan, and she was able to resuscitate the gentleman.
Our priorities are going to be wound care and infectious diseases, but as we get more experience with this, we'll just adapt our services to meet the needs of the people and maintain flexibility and just try to provide quality, compassionate care.
Being able to provide testing on site where we don't need to bring people to a location to do those sorts of things. I think our community behavioral health, we offer everything from peer-to-peer support, counseling, blood pressure, STI testing, having it all within one organization, and then also being able to help people access other supports and being somebody like a case manager who connects them to care, because not a lot of people know how to access these systems.
I think what everybody needs to know is that if, the issues that pervade the people that engage DRP, if you're not dealing with them now, you or one of your family members will if you do nothing. And when we do nothing, it becomes more and more people. We're hearing now about the opioid crisis. And now we're not just hearing about it in urban America, it's in suburban and urban places now. And a lot of those people 20 years ago felt like that was a Detroit problem. That's an LA problem. That's a Chicago problem. But what we see now is when you stop participating in all aspects of your community, like this one, you make the problem more pervasive, and it's coming.
Detroit Recovery Project. Wow. That's good work that you do, Dr. Andre. It's very good work that you do, Dr. Johnson. I'm so glad that we're here with you today. I'm waiting for you to come up on screen. I want to see your face so we can talk about what's happening in Detroit. What I really want to hear about is your origin story. How did you start Detroit Recovery Project?
Okay, absolutely. Can you see me and hear me okay?
I can see you and hear you.
Okay.
We can
So
see you and hear you.
I'll get right into it. First, I would be remiss not to acknowledge you and your leadership, Nyla. I just want to say thank you for all you've been doing day in and day out. I know you put a lot of sweat equity into really building CARD and keeping us visible and on the map. And definitely want to thank the entire team, Dr. CJ and her leadership and production skills as well. That multi-talented, it means a lot. I think it's important that, that's kind of how we came together. In fact, when I think about the origins of Detroit Recovery Project, when we first started the organization, I was working out of the City of Detroit Health Department under a leader by the name of Dr. Calvin Trent, who was the director of the Bureau of Substance Abuse. That department was responsible for providing financial oversight, administrative oversight to or for block grant and Medicaid dollars in the city of Detroit. That money was designated to support treatment and prevention in the city. And my first introduction, kind of on a higher up, from an administrative level, um, I was able to gain a lot of insight because I believe it or not, I used to be an auditor where I used to conduct programmatic and financial audits to all the provider network in the city of Detroit, which obviously I was able to obtain quite a bit of intel around how the business works, how the money flows, which is obviously important when you're trying to build a nonprofit. But one day we were outside of the Cobo Hall Conference Center downtown Detroit. We had about 1,500 people in treatment that were active, and we were hosting a substance abuse recovery conference. And we were going over some research that we had recently conducted. And the research indicated that on an average, we had about 15,000 people in the Detroit treatment system per day, and about 80% of those individuals were returning to active using within 30 days of exiting the treatment program. And it was at that time Dr. Trent said, "Hey, Andre, I know you're in long-term recovery, and I want you to start building some programs so that we can reduce the recidivism rate in the city of Detroit." And at that time, Dr. Trent said, "Here's $100,000 seed money to start the program." Um, and this, I was 30 some years old at that time. My initial thought is I'm rich. I got $100,000.
Let's go.
And yeah, Pastor, I thought I was the man. I got $100,000. Um, but little did I know. Well, the first thing was I started recruiting people that I knew that were part of the recovery community that worked in the field. So I called a friend, Dwight Ritchie. He worked at a methadone facility. I called a renowned national trainer by the name of Michael Johnson, who worked in the field. I called another mentor of mine, Mr. Alan Bray, who ran one of the largest residential treatment programs. And then I called people, Lawrence Kenyatta, who worked in the prevention space, and about 15 of us started meeting on a monthly basis, and we established a chair and a co-chair. And from there, in the beginning, we were known as the Recovery Committee. And this Recovery Committee, we started putting together activities. We would host a relapse prevention workshop group in the Detroit Health Department every Tuesday from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. The Detroit Health Department has an auditorium that seats about 200 people. It would be a standing room only every Tuesday. And the energy just was just crazy. And, imagine, I got all these recovering folks inside of the City of Detroit Health Department. And it was like a takeover. Um, and I knew at that time that we needed our own space. You know what I mean? We needed a space where people can really be comfortable and accepted, because I also knew that there still was a lot of stigmatization. And so as we evolved, that was one of the initial things I started doing. I said, I want to have relapse prevention support groups every week. And then I said, well, we're going to apply for a grant. I had no knowledge, no experience whatsoever writing a grant. I was able to talk to a lady by the name of Dr. Virginia Ryan, who had been writing grants since the 80s, and she had retired. And she said, Andre, I'll write the grant just because of you.
That's right.
And I said, thank you, Dr. Ryan. And we never talked money or anything, neither. She wrote the grant. 2 weeks later, she wrote the grant and she gave me her invoice, and it was $10,000. And I was like, oh, sugar, honey, iced tea. I ain't never had an invoice that large. So I had to take that to Dr. Trent to pay that bill.
Figure it out.
And then
That's right.
5 months later, we were awarded a grant called the Recovery Community Support Program
That's right.
from the federal government for $1.4 million for the next 4 years. And it was at that time I realized that we are on to something. So I took that money and just continuously built and developed program services. And so the program services were centered around recovery support services. And we had the four models of social support, informational support, instrumental support, companionship, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one. And so, just to give you an idea,
Yeah.
um, informational support is really helping people who may need Social Security, really just meeting them where they are related to
Right.
their needs. And then you have companionship. So we started a recovery basketball league.
That's what's up.
We had a
That's
bowling
what's
league,
up.
a domino league. I mean, these guys play
Yeah.
dominoes and they talk trash. They
Yeah.
talk about each other. I mean, you swear you'll be in a room with
See
Said
what
the
we do.
Entertainer and Steve Harvey at the same time. They talk bad, and we always had to have coffee and Coca Cola. As long as you got coffee and Coca Cola, people can play
Good to
cards,
go.
and that's when we started like really just building some momentum and synergy around companionship. Because then people
Absolutely.
start calling people. We had something called warm chatter, where our peers would call people who were new in recovery every day, every morning, and say, "Hey, we're just checking in. We want to make sure your recovery is going good and what you're doing today." Things like that is another form of social support. And so from there, um, we just took off. I talked to another friend, colleague who was the CEO, is currently the CEO of Detroit Rescue Mission Ministry. And I said, hey, we need some space. Do you have any space? And he had two buildings that he basically allowed us to operate out of for 5 years without any expenses. Didn't have to pay no
Wow.
utility bills, didn't have to
Wow.
pay no rent. I mean, I would ask him, can I pay the utilities? We didn't have to do anything. So the more we had started investing in the program, more opportunities kind of start coming our way. We had access to a gym where we could play basketball 3 days a week. And so for me, it was really building a recovery community. And
Well, you
from there, we had to pivot because money was starting to dry up in different places. So we had to pivot to be able to identify other resources that was in alignment with our mission statement, that was
mhm.
in alignment with helping people in recovery. And we decided that we would expand our services so that we can ultimately sustain our organization. So we
Well,
became
you talk about a lot of this in building a recovery ecosystem, right?
yes.
One of the things that I think is important, and we're going to have our new RCO affiliates ask some, direct questions about, what do we do in those early stages? But I want to take it back a little bit to talk about why this is important, why CARD is important, why it's important to have you and your organization, along with Northern Ohio Recovery Association that just celebrated 20 years, and Chicago Recovering Communities Coalition, also one of our advisory board members, which just hosted SAMHSA's Big Recovery Bash this past Recovery Month in September. But why it's important to have you in the mix with us while we are mentoring and incubating, amplifying, first of all, identifying and then amplifying naturally and organically growing recovery in Black communities. Why it's important to have this space. We have to create a space of mentorship and of guidance so that we don't have to remake the wheel, so that we can hear the stories of how you had to pivot, but also listening to why culture is the connector. So what I hear you saying is that recovery can happen in a game of bones. Like you're saying, recovery. You didn't mention spades, which I'm East Coast, so I was a little upset about that, but that's okay because we play spades. But what you're saying to me is recovery can happen where recovery happens, where people meet, where people connect, where people feel seen and heard and needed and respected. And I think that's part of what For the Culture is about when we're talking about what wellness looks like in our community. We've been talking a lot about the changing language around recovery. Like, are we talking about recovery? Are we talking about wellness? Are we talking about life? We're talking about connection. We're talking about culture. But regardless of what words we're using, what I'm hearing you say is that Detroit Recovery Project sprung out of what is the saying is necessity is the mother of invention.
Hmm. Yes.
Black communities thrive and to be resilient and to figure it out. And so we applaud you and we applaud our advisory board members, Minority Recovering Communities Coalition in Indiana, Incorporated, Mercy in Indiana, as a matter of fact. We applaud our brothers like Dr. Jonathan Lofgren, who set us off with the Black Recovery Principles, which you can find on thecard.org on our website, and started us off years ago with the Black paper instead of the white paper, the Black paper that talks about why Black led recovery community organizations are needed, desperately needed in our communities. So I'm looking at my time. I wanna come over to introduce our new recovery community affiliates, both Newness of Life Incorporated out of Panama City, our Pastor Linva Massolino, and our recovery champion, Sarah Johnson, with the Orangeburg Rural Recovery Initiative. Two really different organizations, but again, answering the need in their own particular and individual organizations. I want to give both of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and tell us why, what's your purpose, why are you here, Pastor? Okay, we're actually going to pause for a second. So, 1 second for you, Pastor. I'm sorry, 1 second. I want to do one more thing because we've got when CARD started, our idea was to identify the top presenting communities in the entire country that were presenting with opioid related deaths. So the idea is this, for years, the story was that, opioids weren't a problem in the Black community. And that continued, that farce continued and continued. And what we found is that because of historical trauma, systemic challenges and barriers, what was happening is we weren't showing up, we weren't reporting with issues with opioids, but actually opioids have become a severe problem in our communities, specifically because of the barriers of access to treatment. We are viewed differently by the medical community, so therefore access to life-saving treatments aren't necessarily as accessible and available and attainable in our communities. So this is not our first epidemic. We know that. But one of the communities that we identified was New Orleans, Louisiana. So we want to feature NOLA RC today just to make sure that you all know that CARD is incubating, I mean, champions around the country. And the brothers and sisters with NOLA RC, I want to give you your props, and we got a little bit we want to show you about the work that they're doing.
Good morning. Good morning. Went out with a statement saying that New Orleans, although we had resources, we didn't have a recovery community. I was told that I was ignorant about what a recovery community was. And what a recovery community is a group of people that's about recovery, that's about addressing addictions and problems that surround addiction, coming together and working together towards that cause.
And I believe that you are here because you have passion that is your fuel. And so when we put match to fuel, what do we get? Right. We get fire. We get wildfire. And that's why we're here. We're here to spark something so that you can take the information that you received today and run wild with it.
I come with my cup empty, just trusting God that it get full so I can take back information.
So the pastors need to receive this and know that when you have your congregation, find somebody who know about this stuff. Because yeah, you can pray with them and all that, but find somebody who know about this to help them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So that was New Orleans. New Orleans is a whole get down in and of itself. We were talking about culture as the connector when it comes to recovery and wellness. You know, in most communities, when we come and meet folks in their communities, we break bread. You know, that's again just how we get down. We might do a line dance, you know, but I got to New Orleans and I had to have them teach me how to second line. Well, they haven't done it yet. I asked though, because it's important again to meet people where they are. Culture is the connector when it comes to wellness, and you know what's important to me in my particular community. So our brother Pastor Linva Massolino is in Panama City, Florida. So CARD is in Panama City, Florida. We're working with folks in Oakland, California. We're working with folks in Mississippi. We're working with folks in Tennessee, in South Carolina. So Pastor Linva, I am so proud to be here with you in Newness of Life. We're going to take just a moment and have you introduce yourself in Newness of Life. We're going to have Sarah introduce herself, and then we're going to talk with Dr. Andre Johnson a bit about what happens when a new RCO meets challenges and barriers and has to do some pivots. So Pastor Linva, what's up?
Okay, awesome. Good evening, everyone. Of course, first of all, I would like to say thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to be here with CARD as well and Nyla. I do echo what Dr. Johnson mentioned, your leadership, and I do appreciate everything as well, too. Awesome. And I also want to honor everyone else that's here on the call, Dr. CJ as well, right? And Ori also. And listen, one thing I do want to, I've probably been in the actual recovery space for 3 years as far as the RCO and knowing, understanding recovery, but almost from since day one, I've heard the name Dr. Andre Johnson and tied to recovery and tied to recovery community organizations. So just to be able to be here is an honor to be on the same panel with you and to be able to have this discussion with you as well, sir. So thank you. So our Newness of Life Incorporated, We are, again, in Panama City. And just quickly, our vision is to see individuals worldwide recover and transition out of unfavorable cycles into a newness of life. So whatever that unfavorable cycle may be, it may be addiction, of course. It may be mental health. It may be a divorce or poverty or whatever that unfavorable cycle is. Once we get involved with your life, or you can come be a part of Newness of Life, that we can help walk you through that transition out of that unfavorable cycle, so that you also can experience a newness of life as well, and whatever that looks like for you. So again, thank you very much.
I love that. Whatever it looks like for you. That's the most important thing. What does it look like for you? What does
Right.
newness of life, what does recreation of your life look like? It doesn't have to be according to any cookie cutter that says this is what it's supposed to be, this is what it's supposed to look like. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people from approaching, the doors of treatment or recovery, or even sometimes prevention. I don't do that. It doesn't look like that for me. So what it looks like in Panama City is not what it looks like in Memphis. It's not what it looks like in New Orleans. It's not what it looks down in Old Town, right? I'm from Harlem, definitely what it looks like in Harlem. I live in LA. It's not what it looks like here. Although there are some pieces, of course, that knit us all together in the non-monolithic. There is no monolithic Black experience, but there is a Black experience that we can speak to in terms of barriers and challenges that have gotten us where we are. So I want to introduce Sarah Johnson from the Orangeburg Rural Recovery Initiative, which we began with at inception, helping put together a mission and a vision. We're in the midst right now of building a strong Black board. We're incredibly, incredibly psyched about that. But Sarah, can you introduce yourself and give us your purpose? How'd you get here?
Okay, my name is Sarah Johnson, and I'm with the Orangeburg Rural Recovery Initiative out of Orangeburg, South Carolina, and the Tri-County areas surrounding it. I came here as a lived experience person who promised my higher power that if he allowed me to live and recover, that I would give back that which was so freely given to me. In February of this year, I had the pleasure of being brought under the wings of Nyla Christian and the Card family. She listened to my vision, she listened to my passion, and she showed me how I can have what I eventually want, which is my own recovery facility. But in the meantime, I could reach into my county, in my rural areas, to my underserved, under-recognized, underdeveloped, underappreciated brothers and sisters who suffer in these horrible, horrible throes of these addictions and diseases, and make my eventual goal be stronger by building this foundation in my rural community, which is where the hospitalization and the treatments are really needed. To remove the stigma. Dr. Johnson, when you said the thing about them coming together over a game of cards or things like that, it's the ability to go into a space and feel normal and not have to think that I am this and I am that. I am among my people, and they appreciate me and they acknowledge me and they see me. So that's my passion. That's my desire for doing this type of work. The Orangeburg Rural Recovery Initiative, we are in its infancy. We have a board. We are working on how we can put ourselves in the community and be understood and accepted. So later on down the line, I get to pick your brain, Dr. Johnson, and find out some things about how you made yours work. And that's where I am right now. And thank you all so much for including someone as new as me into something this magnificent. I'm just sitting in awe of what I'm going to learn this evening. So thank you.
Yeah, sister, you are our future. You are our future, and I think
Thank
that's the most. That's an incredibly important thing. But going back to a tree without roots, a tree without knowledge of its roots certainly can't sprout branches. So we're all needed here. It is an ecosystem, right? Right. It's another form of an ecosystem. The elders giving back to the new ones, and so I want to get a little bit into some questions directly for Dr. Johnson. I also want to, in the excitement, I forgot to say, our mission, CARD's mission, is to advance the development and sustainability of African American recovery community organizations through capacity building, education, and advocacy. I think that that's an important piece because we are a complementary piece in the entire cog. Like we're a cog in what's happening because the Black recovery advocacy movement is certainly not just CARD. We are a piece of the puzzle. There are folks moving and grooving all over this country trying to make sure that we have equitable and culturally attuned access to recovery support services. And so I want to make sure that I say that so you understand that we're part of a world and a movement that's happening for the betterment of our entire community. So CARD is a phenomenon. We're a phenomenon. We really, really are. I'm proud to be the leader of CARD. And I also do not want to leave out, you can't do this without a team. Miss Adriana Kraft, I call her Adriana the Great, because we couldn't move without the life force and the lifeblood that keeps us moving along. And our program manager is amazing. So shout out to you, Adriana, and shout out to the board of Center for African American Recovery Development for your support and your vision. So let's get into a little question and answer. I don't know if we have any live questions coming from the audience. Oh, wonderful. And I do want to say we're going to be doing this, right? We're going to be doing this. So you can join us. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So our backstage support says we do have some live questions, and I'm going to get those live questions, but I'm going to start the conversation between the three of us. So I know you already have some questions, Pastor, and Sarah, I know you have a question or two to ask. So please go right ahead. And Dr. Andre, we're going to have a question and answer for about 5-7 minutes. And then I'm going to jump to some live questions. Okay. Pastor? Pastor, I think there might be a delay. Can you hear me, Pastor? Pastor Linva? Okay, there might be a little delay there. Not sure. Somebody
Okay,
shake
yes.
your head and tell me if you can hear me. If you can hear me, shake
Okay.
your head. Let me know.
All right. Again, an honor to be here.
Okay.
Yes.
Rock and roll.
All right. So should I start off or?
Yes, Pastor, you have a question for Dr. Johnson. Please go ahead.
Again, super honored to be Dr. Johnson. When okay, yes. How can we successfully integrate faith-based recovery models with peer support initiatives?
Great question. So like my approach to that has been recruiting. Like in Detroit, we have a number of pastors that are in long-term recovery. So I consider them kind of like low-hanging fruit. So you want to look for allies. Where in a faith-based community, we know that a lot of times either people in recovery are often singing in a choir, they're usher, they're deacons. So try to kind of get some fillers out in the community and find out where these people are, because we are spread throughout the faith-based community. And then also look for allies. For example, you may have mothers of people in recovery, fathers of people in recovery. I think it's just really perhaps hosting a faith-based get-together for allies in recovery, and then spell it out, allies, whether you're in recovery yourself or you're a family member, a loved one, or a friend in long-term or early recovery. We want to see you and we want to help you. We would like for you to be part of our faith-based peer support teams so that we can continue message out and empower those in recovery.
That's good stuff.
Does that
And
make
you know
sense?
what, go ahead, Dr. Johnson. I'm sorry.
And that was an approach, and I'm so happy of your enthusiasm. I'm going to have to use your term, unfavorable cycle. I think it's awesome, and I also, I had a faith-based community that I built as an arm, and I had a number. You have your big churches, your small churches in Detroit. We the land of churches. We got 5,000 churches in Detroit, in the inner city. And so I was able to tap like one of our historical churches, one of the most influent churches. The senior pastor was a person in long-term recovery. Person is also on my board of directors. You follow me? And so we had a lot of access. And so I just pulled, again, pulling people in that I knew that was part of the process. Was that
So
helpful?
that's about building community, I want to say, which is really what
Was that helpful?
this episode is about. Um, what does building community mean to you in the recovery space, and why is this important? Is one of the questions that just came through. That's a live question, and I think you just actually answered it, Dr. Johnson. I think we're talking about including faith-based sectors because where do I go? I mean, there's two places I go. Well, there's a couple of places I go, but traditionally, we come to a respected, well-known member of the community, substance use disorder, behavioral health, mental health, signal a crisis oftentimes in faith, and we may go to our pastor, right? We may go to our church family. But you also said something important, Dr. Johnson. Family is important. Allies are important. Remembering that our church family, that our faith circle, that our faith community, that may not necessarily mean someone who is ordained, but the bottom line is spirituality is a part of wellness, right? So that's an important piece to remember. I see you're going to say something, Dr. Johnson, please.
Yeah, and I just want to add, so we build allies across the spectrum. So we have Muslims, we have the, the rabbis, we have non-denominational church, Baptist church. We have members of all those sectors. And every September we do a recovery prayer breakfast, and we
Yes.
continuously invite those individuals out to our prayer breakfast, and all those individuals are giving different prayer suggestions, like praying for the family, praying for the individual, praying for the homeless. So that way we begin to build some camaraderie and some relationships. You know,
Absolutely. I'm going to invite you into the conversation, Sarah. And in the middle, I'm gonna drop another question that would be for both Ori, which is Orangeburg Rural Recovery Initiative, and for Noli, Newness of Life Incorporated. How has partnering with CARD or other organizations shaped the way that you approach your work? And I'm gonna actually, Sarah, this is probably kind of a new question. Let's talk about this with you for a second, and then we'll jump into you asking Dr. Johnson a question. How has partnering with CARD thus far shaped your approach to recovery advocacy?
Um, with the card model, it it gives it structure. And it's a
Okay.
different kind of structure than when you work in the industry as well. It's, it's a different kind of structure than working in the industry because I work in the industry itself of recovery. But on this side of it, it's a model that targets specifically the community that I live in, and that model shows me that it can be taken anywhere. And when I heard the list of places, I was surprised that little old Orangeburg made the list.
Yeah.
But it's that, and it's kind of like how do I put this? It's kind of like going home and
Hey.
having that senior aunt or uncle or grandparent to sit you down and say, look here, baby, this is how you need to do it. And this is what's worked in the past.
I ain't
And
got no
this is what's going
grandbabies
to
yet,
work
but
now. I'm from the South. And when I
that's
say
what's
South,
up.
I mean deep South. But it's kind of like that. So I
Sure.
didn't feel like I
Sure.
was walking into some corporate big wig that was going to spout a lot of jargon at me that I didn't
Yes.
understand. I felt like I was going sitting down with my favorite aunt or uncle, and they were saying, look here, this is how it's going, this is how it is, this
That's
is
right.
what's worked in the past. Now I see where you are right now. So if you take this and you sit this in your living room, it's going to make your whole decor look better. Kind of
That's
like
what's up.
that thought pattern.
Yeah.
And
That's
with
and that's
that being
beautiful.
and with that being said, Dr. Johnson, that's my leeway. What kind of
That's right.
strategies do you use to engage your rural communities? And I don't know if Detroit has rural like the South has rural, but I'm sure you do have those outlying areas. How do you engage them in the recovery efforts? How do you bring them to the table?
So for me, building communities of recovery is across the spectrum. And so we try to engage people. We have a large network in the state of Michigan, but particularly in Detroit, we're a large urban community. So I spend most of my time working in Detroit. However, I do keep the connections and the lines of communication open in the suburbs and in our rural communities. And so I often call people, I support people in those communities when they're hosting things during recovery month. They invite me out. So I believe in the spirit of reciprocity. We support each other because regardless of the communities, we know the problems are still the same, whether it's access, whether it's barriers, whether it's
Right.
challenges, try to mitigate and support each other as best as possible, if that
Right.
makes
We're getting
sense.
this is that's absolutely, and I think that it's important that we talk about rural spaces. Sarah, one of the things that I can say about Ori that I think is fantastic. Sarah, is it 3 counties? Is it 3 counties that we're spanning here?
Right.
Yeah, it's important that, and I think some of the first things that we talked about, Sarah, was of accessibility, right?
Right.
Being able to access support services that were culturally attuned and supportive of our folks in a way that was destigmatizing, that was
Right.
welcoming. And now Ori is actually planning some things to take information about harm reduction, information about prevention and recovery and wellness, life affirming, life saving information to the community, right? Rather than trying to string people in, because traditionally, I go to the social services folks and they ask me about my kids and they ask me about things that may put me in a situation, or I don't want to approach those services because of the justifiable fear
Mhm.
and trauma that we have survived in dealing with services when it comes to recovery and wellness. I'm going to get a bit into some. I know that we have some more questions for you, Dr. Johnson. I just want to put some questions on the board that are from our attendees, our participants, our viewers. Let's see. How do you approach creating inclusive spaces that serve diverse populations? I think this is an important question, Dr. Johnson, because when CARD began, we are Black-led recovery community organizations that serve, hey, Dr. CJ, communities underserved by addiction recovery services. We want to be clear that we are Black-led and Black-run, and we serve communities that are underserved, which means we are focusing on amplifying Black leadership to serve all communities. So, Dr. Johnson, how do you approach creating inclusive spaces that are going to serve diverse populations? Because recovery is not a one size fit all.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I think for me, it's really an approach. It's a more intentional approach that involves being mindful of your community. So that means, if you have a community of women that may need women's specialty services, then
Mhm.
let's help support that group. We had a group of men who identified as Black gay men, and they said we need an MSM group, support group, men who have sex with men. And they asked if they can use our recovery center as a safe space to have their support group. So it's really just, again, building relationships with individuals, and it really kind of happens organically because we have a very welcoming environment, and we're very intentional about who we support and how we support people. That as long as, the ultimate goal is to help support people in their recovery process and creating
Yes.
that safe space. And the more we do that, we begin to break down some stigmatization. And
Yeah.
when we talk about diversity, that means to me, having men, having women, there's there's an emerging young group of people in recovery, which is really indicative of our CARD board. I
Mhm.
think I'm probably on the old side of the spectrum, but we got young folks like Lionel and Miss Craft, who are really doing some exceptional work in this space.
Sure.
And I think it's just being mindful of the population, being intentional with our approaches to
I love that.
creating that diverse space. We have a Latino community, we have a Middle Eastern community, so I have relationships with individuals in those communities, although I can't speak Spanish, but I have people who can represent if needed.
Yes, mindful, intentional. I think an important piece here is when we start talking about what diversity means, we're talking about belonging. I always say culture is the connector. You wanna know what's happening with Black folks. Ask Black folks. You want to know what's happening with young folks? Ask young folks. And then amplify their ideas, support their ideas, give unique and diverse populations a way to heal their own communities. This is not just about trauma informed practices, right? Which is a bandied about term. This is about healing centered practices. It's about healing centered supports. We have a few more questions, and we're going to start closing out our hour in just a bit. But I want to thank all of you for your insightful questions, and Dr. Johnson, definitely for offering yourself. This is part of what we need, a community of practice that's led and guided by folks who have seniority in this space, who will share information freely, who will open doors, who will not get into places and then close doors behind them. I have been very, very fortunate with people like Anita Bradley and Dora Dansler Wright and Jonathan Lofgren and Dr. Johnson, to sit. And we used to say sit at your feet, but it's really an exchange of information. But we appreciate your leadership, definitely. So I've got two more questions here. Um, I'll start with what impacts, and this is a question for me actually, what impacts do you hope initiatives like FTC 2.0, that's For the Culture 2.0, back in these streets, as our board member Lionel Oglesby will say, but what impact do we hope For the Culture will have on the recovery movement? We hope that we will be creating a space where folks can come and discuss emerging trends, challenges, barriers, share positive outcomes. One of the things that this particular episode is doing is talking about building community. What does that look like in wellness, and what does it look like in Black communities? There will be other episodes where we talk about, hard, straight stats, facts. What's the CDC saying? What's SAMHSA saying? SAPSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. What are they saying about how numbers are showing up? Because data drives dollars, as Anita Bradley will always tell me, data drives dollars. We need to make sure that we are figuring out and finding out how the community feels about what's happening, and whether services, even the services that CARD RCO affiliates are delivering in our support services, whether or not they're effective. That's important. Again, you want to know how folks are doing, ask folks how they're doing. So I'm going to come back to asking a roundup question here, which is, what is one lesson or piece of advice that you've learned from your recovery from your journey in recovery advocacy or leadership? I'm going to start with our newest member, Sarah Johnson. I'm springing this on you, but I would love to hear, what's one thing that you've learned that you would share with a new leader? Because we're going to be putting you on the spot to become a guide in this movement.
Um, if I were to, as a newcomer, what I would share with a fellow newcomer, no dream is too big. It may take some time to get it done. Pay attention to the details and the small pieces. Review the programs that have gone before you. Find out from their leaders what really worked, what really didn't work, and what could have been tweaked a different way to probably work better. Bring them into your new space and let them take a look around.
Wow.
And see what they have to offer as far as attaboys or rooms for improvement. So that's the things that I've been able to do, and that's the kind of things that I would bring to a new person.
Lots of learning. Staying open for learning is what I hear, Sarah. That's fantastic. Pastor Linva. What's something that something you've learned in your journey as an advocate? Because you've also been in this space. I don't want to misquote it, but I know there's a date, and I know it's July 4th, and I don't know the year, but I want to hear from you. What is one of the things that you would share?
July 4th, 1995 is when my life changed. I actually gave my life to the Lord on that day. There was, I was on a 3-day cocaine binge on the verge of overdosing, but the Lord changed my life. And so that's always been a special day for me as well. And one thing that I would share with newcomers to this space is that you be sure you are and continue to
We may have a little bit of a delay, but it's okay. Okay, so we had a little bit of a delay with Pastor Linva, and we've lost him for a moment. But I think when he comes back, he's going to say one of my favorite things, which is what does he say? Dominate your gift zone. My brother says, dominate your gift zone, know who you are, and step into who you are, especially when you're doing this work, which it's important that you do your own personal recovery work, your own personal wellness work, your own personal centering work, because we can't help others if we're not um, centered ourselves. So I will say that. Dr. Andre Johnson, I'm going to read the question again because I think it's a really, really good question. I also want to acknowledge there's a couple more questions that are specific to getting involved. Before I come to you, Dr. Andre, there's a couple of more questions that are specific to getting involved with CARD and getting involved with the recovery advocacy movement. That's a super important question. Those are super important questions. First of all, let me say this. We can be found at thecard.org. That's THECAARD.org. Thecard.org. And there you can find, so CARD has a scope of services. We do quite a few things. We work with academic institutions that are trying to do respectful and meaningful and impactful research with our community because we don't open our doors, right? So we do work with academic institutions trying to help with that data that's missing in our community. We also work with states. We work with large organizations trying to better program services so that they are culturally attuned for our community. So we work with ally organizations. We've got 3 phases where we work with brand new organizations where we are identifying and then amplifying, organically growing recovery in Black communities. And then we work with organizations who are already established and want to better reach and have better impact in communities of color. So those are the ways that you can work with us, and we do customize our programs. But we'd love to hear from you. So that's how you get in touch with CARD. And if there are any other organizations that we can also connect you with in the space, we will certainly do that. But I'm coming to you now, Dr. Andre, and I'm coming back to that question because we're rounding up our hour. So the question for you, sir, is, let's see, where to go? Here we go. So the question is gone. Here it is. What is one lesson or piece of advice that you've learned from your journey in recovery, advocacy, or leadership? What's one thing you would share with us? I know there's going to be a few, but you know, I know,
So,
I know. First of all, read the book. That's the recovery
yeah,
ecosystem. Let me blow that up right now. The Recovery Ecosystem by Dr. Andre Johnson. There it is. Please get it. Where can we find it? Please tell us where we can find it, Dr. Johnson.
drandrejohnson.com, drandrejohnson.com.
All
Or you
right.
can email me, call me directly, and I'll mail it to you personally. I think for me, it's remain buoyant, being
Mm,
flexible, because you're going to encounter some challenges, you're going to encounter some hard times, and it's just part of the process. We all experience growing pains, but network, build a relationship with CARD. This is your opportunity to build and be part of a national movement. That's always very inspirational. I always tell folks, you know, you hang out with 9 broke people, you're gonna be the 10th broke person. If you hang out with 9 winners, then you're gonna be the 10th winner. CARD are the winners in the program. CARD is all about developing African American recovery communities throughout the nation. There is a shortage. We know there exists something called disparities across rural, urban, suburban areas when you think about African Americans. So we want to make a difference in these health disparities, these criminal justice disparities, these substance use disorder disparities, the mental health disparities. And I think we're going to move the needle. On the news today, they talked about this morning there's been a 17% decrease of opioid overdose use, according to the Center for Disease Control. My first question is, are those numbers indicative of people of color? And my thought is no. We know that overdose deaths has risen among people of color over the last few years. So we got a lot of work to do. And so we want to continue to work together.
Mm-hmm. 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 I love that. I hear work together. I hear there's work to do. I'm going to answer the question. I introduce myself usually as a free Black woman in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is that over the last 17 years, I've had the opportunity to work with some powerful Black women who have taught me what it means to make a dollar out of 15 cents and to figure out what wellness really means to me in my heart and my core and my soul. And I do everything I can to pass that on to the next sister, the next brother, and the next family. And I think what we'd like to leave you with today is what my brother Andre is saying. This is about togetherness. It's about network. It's about creating, it's about wrapping our hands and our arms around a community that has been lost and forgotten, that was targeted first, and then has been lost and forgotten in this movement. And yes, there are numbers that say that the overdose rate has decreased. That is actually not true of our community. And I think that that needs to be kept at the forefront. We need to remember that. And we need to figure out what we can do together, working in each one of our little pieces, our little niches. You know, we need to work together in order to figure out how to better support our community. I think another thing that's important that I'd like to leave with as well is recognizing and amplifying new emerging voices in the community, in recovery advocacy, making sure that they have what they need to sustain their unique movements, their diverse needs across this country. Super important. So creating a community of practice, a community of guidance, a community of support around building RCOs that are Black-led and Black-run all over this country. So you guys can reach us again at thecard.org. That's the 1E, card, 2A's, .org. Please join us again. You can also find us on socials. You can find us on, obviously, Instagram. You can find us on LinkedIn. And you can also find us on Facebook. We are really, really honored to be with you today. We're going to answer some of the questions that we've gotten that we didn't have time for today in our socials. Please feel free to reach out to me. I answer my phone far too much, but my name is Nyla Christian. I am the Executive Director of the Center for African American Recovery Development, and we are very, very, very happy to be here with you today. So thanks, and we'll see you guys soon. For the Culture, FTC 2.0.